Welcome to Emotional Sobriety, the next step in recovery, with Dr. Alan Berger and Tom Rutledge.
I love Joe Chisholm. I think that guy is just brilliant.
He's a gem, man. He's a gem.
He really is.
He's an important voice in our program.
Absolutely.
Keep it inclusive, man. It really is. And he's done a remarkable job.
He's a very calm voice in the hectic universe.
We need that, don't we?
Jay and I went to the first international convention of atheists, free thinkers, and all that. And Jay called me up and he said, we should go. And I go, absolutely. And it was in Santa Monica.
I was there too.
I remember, yeah, you did a set. I couldn't get in the room where you were. It was packed. Yeah. They didn't have any. I was walking around there and people look at me and go, what are you doing here? I don't know. What are you doing here? It was phenomenal.
We were missing Alan last week, but we had a great time with just Tom and Carol. But we have Alan Berger with us again, and then also Bill Cleveland, who I have known for the last few years as just a pillar of my AA fellowship in Hermosa Beach. And lately, as my circle has been broadening, I realized that, he's touched just so many people, others that I learned from, and that, I've been continuing this recovery journey with. And it seemed like it would be malpractice if we didn't have him on the podcast and to bat some ideas around about emotional sobriety with Alan. So welcome, Bill. Thanks so much for getting up early and checking in with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you here, Bill. God, you and I go back a long way.
Yeah.
How many years you have now? You're up in the
40
years. So I've probably known you for 40 years.
Yeah.
40 years. And what Patrick is saying, I would second. You have become a voice of what I would call very, very sound and full or optimal recovery in the South Bay Area. And, and I've seen it. I've seen the wisdom in you, just especially the last decade or so of your life is just so obvious. It's so, it's wonderful for me to see, because like Patrick's saying is that your words and your wisdom and your love and your compassion for those of us that are suffering just shines a bright beacon in the South Bay Area for those people, and really welcomes so many people into this incredible journey that we're on.
Well, what I like to say is I've never been bored in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And the gift that I've had that I'm grateful for is I've never lost my enthusiasm for it. And yeah. I don't know why that is.
Well, I think it's gotten greater
right from the start, No,
I think your enthusiasm has actually grown.
Yeah.
I've seen that it's deepened. It's more textured. It's very rich, your enthusiasm today.
Well, what I tell people, if you're bored in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's because you're boring. It's not us.
That's right.
And I've had a lot of fun. And, it's very poignant. You lose people. The human experience is pretty stunning, but mostly I just really enjoy it. I enjoy the characters. I enjoy the humor. One thing about AA is it helps us laugh at who we think we are, not who we really are. But if you got to be able to laugh at yourself, not in a self-deprecating way, but just in the hilarity of the persona that we all carry. Once you look at that, you see it. It's funny.
It is. It's
funny.
We can be so outrageous.
Yeah.
It can be so outrageous. One of the things that, in the lines of that, I remember when I was reading this Theodore Isaac Rubin's book on self-hate, and he was saying that the beginning of that is this claim of special status in our life. And when he said that, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I've always wanted to claim special status, right? And it's such an outrageous thing. I didn't want to be a part of life. I wanted to be exceptional.
I've been enjoying lately, Bill, that you keep returning to this idea of, you don't have to do AA, you get to do AA, and it's something you look forward to, and it's something that really entertains you and fills you up. And I think, lately I've been thinking about like people that they'll maybe do a pretty committed, run of AA for like a few years, and then they'll just step away for a while, and maybe they'll come back, or maybe they won't. But I think I will probably stay in as long as I look at it as something that's to be enjoyed, rather than like a big backpack I'm schlepping around.
Well, about emotional sobriety, my contention is that, like you'll hear people talk about we have alcoholic thinking, like there is such a thing, and I just don't think we're that unique. I think what we really are is emotionally immature. And for most of us, like me, I started drinking and using in my teenage years, and I did it for a good solid 22 years. I mean, just really, it was my career path, evidently. As you look back on it, you get swept up in it. And I think I missed a lot of lessons. So I got here at 37 years old, and I had the emotional development of a very angry and disturbed 16-year-old, the one with the problem with authority. And I look like I'm growing up, but I'm not, right? So the surrender process in AA, if you really get into it, like what happened to me, and you work the steps, you're going to go through a series of surrenders that you cannot avoid. And there's an especially powerful one that happens, it seems to me, between 8 and 12 years sober. And some people call it the second surrender. And that's the collapse of the egoic structure. I mean, you confront yourself stone cold sober, you blow up your life, something happens, and who do you blame? I mean, you're looking, because we're always looking for somebody to blame. We have a story. You can't get to AA and not know who they are, the ones that put us here, and it's not unique to us, but it's very stunning in AA. You sponsor guys and they're all talking about that boss and the wife, and, it's all about them, and I believe that mostly I led my life believing unconsciously that things outside myself need to be different in order for me to be okay. Now, when you say that out loud, you go, what? But isn't that how we are? You're the problem. You're responsible for my emotional state, and you're responsible for my behavior. If you hadn't have said what you said, I wouldn't be yelling at you right now. It's your fault that I'm angry, and it's your fault that I'm straightening you out because you're wrong. And I feel very justified in that behavior. In AA, we're not really concerned about how you feel or what your story is. We're just concerned about your behavior. My sponsor told me, stop yelling at your wife. And I had to explain to him again why there's a reason. It doesn't come from a vacuum. And he was not concerned with my explanation for me being a bully to a woman that's 5'3". And I'm 6'5". He was not interested in that. And I remember leaving his house thinking, man, this is not psychotherapy. This is not, they're always interested in what I thought and how I felt. And he just isn't that. He's only interested in my behavior. So at 10 years sober, I blow up my life sober, and I did a big inventory, and you're forced to look, and I realized I am the source of all the chaos in my life. It's not them. That's an awakening. And that kind of self-awareness without humor is depression. When you realize that, and then what do you do? What do you do then? Well, that's the awakening process. You realize that I'm the source of all that. And then you go from there, you do the inventory, you start making amends and stuff, and life begins to change. And you would think at 40 years sober, I'd have some insight into that. So what we do in AA is we just tell our story, and the interesting thing I find interesting in speaker people or people that are doing that is what they think is going on here. What is really happening here? Because our lives have been saved. Certainly that's remarkable. But the growing up process, I mean, you think of the wisdom in AA, there's so much experience. and people expressing that experience in many different forms. There's a little bit of something for everybody. And I find that fascinating. I think it's especially at, 78 years old and long time sober. I think it's the most interesting thing that's ever happened to me.
Very cool. Ernie Larson calls it the second first step.
Yeah.
Second first step, and that's what you described, and it's powerful. And then, like you said, Bill, then you go back and you start working the steps from that perspective, and it has a whole different meaning. And that's when we start to grow up. When the way you just said it is, I realize it's not what they're doing, and it has nothing to do with my justification of my shitty behavior, right? I mean, it's so true. I mean, I believed those justifications. I thought, of course, how could anybody not react to this situation? You don't expect me to be perfect, do you? I'm not an angel. I'm not God. I mean, so of course I'm going to be reacting. Sorry. We don't get that. We don't get to have those justifications.
You hear some people never tell an alcoholic what to do. We don't like to be told what to do. Don't do that. Now, if you're 14 or 15 years old, that can be kind of cute, maybe even appropriate. When you're 40, it's just stupid.
Yes.
It's just stupid. And you're trying to justify negative behavior. I've done that.
Yeah.
I've tried that mantle on.
True. It's so true, man. At 40, I'm not going to have anybody tell me what to do. And it does. It limits the possibilities in our life terribly. That's why I've been calling that. Our problem is once we get that plug in the jug, we suffer from a growth disorder. We're stuck. We are stuck in our development. And you're right. You look back and you say, my God, all of these characteristics. See, I'm starting to think a little different about it, Bill, but it's along the same lines. See, I think our culture only grows people up into adolescence.
Yeah.
And so it's not just a result of our drinking and using. I think that contributes to it. It has to. Because, what is growth? Learning from your mistakes. Well, what do we describe in the program? I keep trying the same thing and I expect better results all the time, and they're never better, right? I'm not learning from my experience, so I don't grow. But I think that the problem is, and this guy Christopher Lasch, Bill, said it so well, we live in a culture of narcissism. This culture is all about me. It's an all about me culture. It is so rooted in selfishness and in having things that you can't grow along the lines that we would grow if we grow past our adolescence, which is to start to grow into more of a spiritual experience with life.
The spiritual path, any real spiritual path, is about getting out of self.
Yeah.
Not more into it, but getting out of it. Not rejecting it, but just being able to watch yourself, watch the egoic mind operate.
Yeah.
I can watch myself think. Therefore, evidently, I don't have to go where it wants to take me. Right. And that kind of awakening, that realization, I'm utterly powerless. I have to stop the blaming. Nothing was ever personal, and I take everything personal like a teenager does. Nothing is personal. Self-awareness is compared to self-obsession, being able to watch myself move through life. And the thing that's lacking in me, because I am that self-centered person, is compassion. And I don't know I don't have compassion because I've never had it. I've always been wrapped up in self. It's all about me all the time. My interactions with other people is all about what I need or what I can get. And mostly I'm unconscious of that. I'm just behaving like a teenager behaves, And when all that comes together, it's literally about getting out of self. People say in AA, one of the things I like to do was kind of fun, is I'm looking for the true self. What if there's nothing there? What if what you're looking for literally does not exist? What if the real truth is that we are not independent? We are dependent upon each other. The mistake we make of thinking we're standalone, separate, unique people And we're in a pool of consciousness. We're all made of star stuff. We're all carbon units. We're all the same, all of nature. We are not separate. And the ego's job is to create separation. It's part of the human, it's not the enemy. It's part of the human experience. But on the spiritual path, you're kind of forced to look at that. And what I see in Alcoholics Anonymous, especially in my home group I've been going to for 40 years, you develop there's a feeling there. And I feel that connection there. I can feel that connection. And it doesn't require you to feel it too. I just get it, that we're all in this together. The idea of a home group, this is where we live. And I think that's a real live experience of some of the philosophy that you read. Eckhart Tolle describes the ego and the human condition, I think, better than anybody. I just think I hear that voice. I hear him talk about it. And the ego kind of has its own separate life that's kind of separate from the self, whatever self there is. It lives its own life and it defends and protects itself. And it thinks it's me. I think it's me. I'm in collusion with it. And on the spiritual path, you're forced to look at that. In sponsoring people, I believe that why I'm here, and I think for all of us, is to reach the way we get out of self is by doing that selfless kind of service, In sponsoring people, you can see the change. You can see the light come on in people's eyes. Certainly initially when the obsession leaves and stuff, and all of a sudden they wake up and go, geez. And you have an effect. When you enter my life, it disrupts everything. Right now, I'm more focused on you, and I exercise that compassion muscle, and I'm literally getting out of self. Initially, it could be out of ego, like I'm looking for devotees. I'm looking for followers. I'm trying to make a name for myself in an anonymous organization. But the process of doing that, it will change you. It doesn't matter what the motivation is. The interaction like that, pretty soon you care. You begin to care about other people in a very genuine way. And as years go by, these people are like family. I have guys that I sponsor that I'm clearly a father figure. And what I learned about that is I can do that. I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know I could be that for you. Just a loving, caring, there's certain people in my life that I really have. One guy said to me the other day, this guy's been sober a long time, and he looked at me and he said, I know you're not my father, but, it's like, and that's so loving, man. You can't not be touched by that, And
Right.
that's getting out of self. It's transformative,
Well, it's moving away from that self that is so egocentric, right? That's what you're describing. See, there's another part of us, and that's the part that you've realized, and I can hear it. I think I've experienced that in my life. That is a much bigger self in some ways. Even though we thought that other self was so big, it was so small, really. But this other self that you're talking about has an awareness of self and others. And because of that, we're able to have something that I never had before in my life, which is empathy.
Yeah.
That's where I can have compassion. If I can put myself in somebody else's shoes. And it's because with that empathy is the connection I can make to others.
Mm-hmm.
That's the fellowship, and Bill said it. He says, of learning how to have a true partnership, none of us really had any idea. I mean, we had no idea what a true partnership was like. Exactly. Because you can't have that when I'm self-centered. I was unable to do it because I made everything about me.
Yes.
How did you both access that empathy? Because you did eventually, but what was the blockage, or how did you do that?
Well, what I talk about all the time, nothing has changed me more than working with others and sponsoring people, specifically being a sponsor. Jay's my sponsor. I've had the same sponsor for 40 years. And what I say, I should have fired him several times, but he needs me now. I make him look good, but that relationship, you learn things in that relationship. One is there can be conflict, and that doesn't mean the relationship is over. You can work through it. And we've had those experiences, right? So I'm following him around and he's telling me this is why we're here. Now I'm thinking everybody else is doing this. I have no idea that this is kind of special, you know. I'm just doing because I'm new so I'm just doing it. So as I'm clawing my way up the AA corporate ladder, you know, which is my way, I started learning things. I start falling in love with people. You know, I start caring. You can't not care. It's overpowering. People come to you and they lay their life on the line with, they trust you and they do a fifth step and they tell you the secrets they've never told anybody. You can't not be moved by that. You know, you'd have to be a cold-hearted orb, you know, to not be touched by that. And why do they trust me? That's interesting. You know, why did I trust him? And I'd been to mental institutions and I'd been to group therapy for 2.5 years and I'd been gestalted and rolfed and primal screamed, you know, and I told this man stuff that I'd never told those therapists or, you know, I mean, why is that? Isn't that, and I find that fascinating. So you start looking into it, you start reading, you start, you know, if I'm going to do this sponsor thing, maybe I should get better at it, you know, and you have experiences. The number of experiences I've had with people, you walk away from some of them going, wow, what was that? You know, what was that about? You know, and so you develop a philosophy around it. I think the thing I like to hear from speakers and what I try to do is I try to describe what it is I think is going on here. I have my 5 pillars of spiritual condition. You know, when the pandemic hit, you know, it's like all of a sudden you're talking 6 days a week. I mean, how much can you listen to yourself? You know, you're on Zoom and all that stuff. And I start really looking at this, like what is really going on here? What's happening here? You talk about spiritual condition, you know, the only thing that's going to save me is the maintenance of my spiritual condition. So the first job I have in Alcoholics Anonymous is to get one of those so I can maintain it. And this isn't going to happen overnight. I'm not going to just do an inventory and all of a sudden I have a spiritual condition. Certainly hasn't been my story. And in 4 decades of sobriety, I can look back and see life is learned looking backwards, right? I can see the phases I've gone through, the phases of emotional development. You know, what's the Bill C today compared to the Bill C when he was 10 years sober and you thought he was the light in the way and he's pounding on the podium and I did an inventory after that, and I was ashamed of myself. That was embarrassing. When you see it, you go, really, was it that bad? The answer is yes. It was that bad. My sponsor said to me, I said, I think I should quit speaking at meetings. He says, why? I said, there's just too much ego in it. I'm way too carried away with myself. This isn't healthy. I see it now, and I'm embarrassed. I was ashamed. I had a lot of amends to make in AA for a long time for the way I treated people. And he said, you don't get to pick and choose what you will and won't do. But maybe the next time you're speaking in front of some people, why don't you try telling the truth? And I said, well, I'm not lying. What do you mean? He goes, quit doing theater and talk about what's really going on. We will understand. Who do you think you're talking to? So I started talking about ego. I started talking about it and describing it, you know, and just unashamedly. You know, I mean, we all have one. You know, some people pretend they don't, you know. You ever heard a speaker in AA get up to the podium and say, I don't like doing this. There's too much ego in it. I'm looking one way and you're all looking the other way, and I don't like that. I go, bullshit. We love it or we wouldn't do it. You know, if we didn't like it, we wouldn't do it. Plain and simple. You can pretend that you're not wrapped up in it, but let's get real here. And I started talking about stuff like that, you know, and the conversations I began to have with people, other people come up, it registered. You know, like I would talk about something, half the room would groan and the other half would laugh, both in recognition. Because I'm talking to a whole room full of egomaniacs with inferiority complexes, and it manifests itself in different ways. I'm an extrovert, right? I need lots of attention in order for me to be okay. I sit around here in my house and nobody's coming around. I'll start calling people to come over and hang out with me. I like having people. Then there's the introvert. You know, he's as self-centered as I am. It just looks different. He hides out. He doesn't like being around, but it's the same thing. And you begin to realize that. You learn that from sponsoring people. They tell you what's going on, and you pretty soon you register that. You realize that this human condition is very similar among all of us, manifests differently. Some of us are loud. I had a woman tell me one time as I was ranting about something, she said, Bill, you do very loud service, right? The rest of us are just quietly, don't think you're alone in this thing, you know? And Cheryl Townsend, I'll never forget that, you know? I mean,
Cheryl. Oh,
I,
Cheryl.
I
Yeah.
heard her, she was at my 40th birthday, but she's all old now, like the rest of us, you know? And I reminded her of her, and she goes, I remember telling you that. Somebody had to tell you. Shut the fuck up. You know, it's like,
Oh
but
my
I
God.
think the philosophy of AA is fascinating. It's fascinating. And I love talking about it. And I love hearing other people talk about it. You know, I think that's something that we share.
You talked about an amends that you had to make one of your meetings, one of your Tuesday night meetings. It was really brave of you to both, you know, I imagine the experience was as you lived it, but then talking about it in the meeting. And it inspired me to go and make an amends that I had been nursing for a while, and I was too scared to come clean and tell this guy that I'd hurt him. And yeah, I mean, I just feel like that vulnerability in those contexts really does, like, it spills out, or it goes outwards, and it, you know, it gets other people to kind of like work on their behavior. And, you know, it was a big help to me. So
I
thank
think
you.
some of the greatest stories in AA are men's stories. That's when the transformation really happens. Making amends changes the story that we've been telling. In the amends process is where you really learn really that nothing was ever personal. People are just doing what they do, and I happen to be in the blast radius of their behavior. And sometimes you're in my blast radius. So sitting down thinking about this, like, what is the lesson in the amends? Because it's so powerful. That's where a lot of people drift away, or they don't, you know, that's a stopping point for a lot of people. And when I made amends to my father, I really hated my father. I didn't like him. He didn't like me much either. I was a bad kid. And I made amends to my father, and I had a cathartic experience. It was a physical response to that. I went out in my car afterwards and just started sobbing. I couldn't stop. That's a spiritual experience. Those are the kinds of experiences I've had. I look back, I know that's very spiritual. You know, it changed the path of my life, you know, and that's not the only one. You know, every time I did something like that, whether it was well received or not, it changed my life. That's when you turn and walk away from that, you're a different person. It isn't just experiential. It changes the way you perceive the world. So when you push somebody to make the amends, you know, like many times the guy says, I'm not making amends to that son of a bitch, you know, and I just wait, you know. Sooner or later, the idea is to rid yourself of the resentment. It's, you don't want to carry that around with, you know, we all know that, you know, resentment is the number one killer. I think that's pretty damn close to the truth. You know, you see people go out in rage, you know, I had rage. You know, you do something, I would just launch, you know, and I don't have rage. My wife tells me, she says, don't look at me like that. And I said, look, the rage is gone. I just get pissy. You have to put up with pissy, you know? And she goes, no, stop being pissy too, you know? It's like, but that changes. The amends stories are powerful. You know, I've made a couple of them that were really, I waited 10 years to make one. I was afraid. And when it finally happened, then you sit there and wonder, why the hell did I wait all that time? You know, the other thing about amends is that we have no idea the impact that has on people that we make amends to.
Yeah.
You know, can you count how many times anybody's ever walked up to you and said they were sorry for the way they behaved? Or that just doesn't happen. And we go out there and do that, and it fucks people up. It ruins their resentment that they had, you know?
Well, you know, I've noticed, like, in the rooms, there's not a lot of skepticism about the positive side of human nature, because it's an environment that's just so rich with people reaching out to each other and helping each other, and, you know, selfless acts as a prerequisite for entry almost. And I think that, like, I don't, my girlfriend and I, we have this ongoing conversation about like how selfish are people, and what is the essence of people, and more negative than positive. And I think I just like happen to be in an environment or put myself in an environment regularly where people rise, and they rise because they were previously someplace pretty low. But I don't know. I think that AA is just, it's like any institution. It's kind of a microcosm of the whole, and you get all of it in there.
I think when you walk into Alcoholics Anonymous, what you experience is compassion, empathy, like Alan was talking about. Like, weren't you kind of suspicious of why people were being so friendly? It's like, when are they going to ask for money? It's like,
Well, what you were saying, Bill, about the impact that an amends has on a lot of people. And it's really something to be thoughtful about when you say, think about your life and how many people have come up to you and said they're sorry for hurting you or doing something that would have a big impact on your life, negative impact on your life. Recently I went through a divorce and a very painful situation. And it caused me to go back and look at my first marriage because I was trying to use the pain to try to get some idea of how I show up in relationships, right? And so I went back to my first wife and I realized I had a very, very deep amends to make for her. I abandoned her at a very painful point in her life. And I justified it because I felt she abandoned me. But it was just that story I told. Mm-hmm. And it really came out of me being a big baby. Things weren't going the way I wanted them to go, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And so I blamed her, I dumped it all on her, and I felt like I had a license that would justify whatever behavior I had, whatever shitty behavior I had towards her, and I was shitty. I was terrible to her. And I called her up and I started to talk to her about it. And even the awareness I had of what I did wasn't even as deep as what I learned from her when she started to talk. When I was able to open that up and have that dialogue with her, I could see the pain that I had caused in her like I had never seen it before, Bill. And she was able to articulate and cry with me, and we healed something that was, 40 years old. And I felt free from it. But you know what I also realized is she wrote back to me and reached out to me and called me, actually. She says, you just gave me an incredible gift because I didn't know how to deal with the situation that happened between us. And you just allowed me to talk to you about it in a way I never thought I'd have a chance to do it. Mm-hmm. I can almost cry when I'm talking about it now. And it really was healing, man. It was so healing for her. And I realized that it's the same thing, is that when I'm operating out of that immature self, right? It's all about me. I'm not getting what I want my way. It's not happening the way I want. I throw a fit about it and, act like a big baby and stuff like that. Pissy baby, I call myself sometimes. But it's even worse than that. It can be worse than that. But what I realize is that it's something Father Richard Rohr said once. He says, when we are immature, those around us get infected by our immaturity, right? When you're sick, you transmit it. Yeah. But it's also true that when you start the healing path, you also transmit that. Mm-hmm. And I could see that is that attempt at coming to grips with something that I did that was terribly wrong gave her some freedom that she would have not had. And now I started to understand what Bill meant by I had no idea what a true partnership was like. Mm-hmm. Like you said, we are connected. Mm-hmm. We are going to influence each other. We have an impact on each other's life. I am my brother's keeper in many, many ways. And a lot of times I did not know how to handle that responsibility responsibly, right? Because I can't if I'm self-centered. There's no way I can consider you if all I'm considering is me.
Well, and you learned, I was just going to say, and you learned at some point that in the pain of your divorce, you decided to look at your part in a previous marriage. I mean, that's years of learning that got you to the point where, well, what do I do when I'm facing this pain? Is I don't just throw it back on, you know, the
Well,
perp.
that's because I can get out of being a victim. Look at how I've been hurt, and take responsibility and understand. Look, I've been in my current ex-wife's position. I've done things like that, so I'm not going to sit in judgment of that. As much as there's a part of me that would like to, I can understand how we act and how we get to those places. But that's the empathy. I never had that before, Bill. Never had that before.
Why is it so hard for us to admit when we're wrong?
That's that damn ego.
Everybody
You're right.
runs into this. Why is it so hard? Sandy Beach used to say, well, I was, he couldn't even, it wouldn't come out of his mouth. And I remember him saying that, and it just made me quiver because I have that problem. Well, one of the reasons that we don't want to say that we're wrong is because when we're wrong, then we're not okay.
Yeah.
And you can't not be okay. The ego won't allow that. We have to be okay. It has to be your fault. What I've learned, and this friend of mine described this really well to me, he says, what I've learned that even when I'm wrong, I'm still okay,
Right.
And what I like to talk about, I've reached a point in my life when I look in the mirror, I like what I see. I think I'm okay with all my flaws and all my, like when I have a slip, it's usually arrogance. I get really, I'm Bill C, God damn it. You can't talk to me like that. That's a slip, that's become a joke at the men's stag is I'm Bill C, God damn it. A guy gave me a coin, my 40-year coin. He had my picture on it. He had it embossed on there. And on the other side, it says, I'm Bill C, God damn it. And you have to be able to laugh at that, not deny that it exists, but laugh at it, right? So this idea of, like you talk about compassion, empathy, and making amends. In the amends process, this is where this happens. You come to the point where you say, I'm the source of all the chaos in my life. And you can kind of look at that almost in a loving way. Like, well, finally, I get it now. It's me. It's not you. That takes a lot of load off, man, and keeping track of the whole world and how it's behaving and things outside myself need to be different. Let's go of that. Now, initially, it may seem awful. The ego will resist that. Doesn't want to be wrong. It doesn't want to be wrong. And there's freedom in it, though. There's freedom in it. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention, you're talking about your first wife. 8 years ago in February, I had a liver transplant. I almost died. And at about 20 years sober, I started getting really sick with hepatitis C and cirrhosis. And I got rid of it. And then the liver failed. And then I ended up, so I went through this whole thing. And in that time, I started meditating with intent, and where I needed some kind of spiritual help. It doesn't matter what I believe in or don't believe in about God, it's this, I need help. And I knew I couldn't, by that time, I knew I couldn't change the outside situation. Nothing's going to make it go away. But I needed to rely, I didn't want to come from a place of fear and trepidation and my MO, because I'm the classic immature guy, is when I get frightened, I get angry. I start yelling, and I'm a bully. I'm not quiet about it, And I didn't want to do that. And I started meditating with real intent, and I had a real experience. I had an experience, not just one experience, but an experience of some peace in the eye of the storm, right? And in that near-death experience, one of the things that happened, I got lucky and I was in a hospital room and for another, I won't go into the whole story, but a liver came. I'm a big guy and they can only put it in a big person. And the surgeon, the woman who was next in line to get this liver, was too small. So the surgeon came up to my room and said, I've got a liver for you right now. And 45 minutes later, I was in surgery and I was dying. They were draining 4 to 7 liters of fluid out of me every 3 or 4 days. Ascites were building up, and I was scrawny. The body feeds off the protein in your muscles, and it was just awful. I was dying, literally, and I knew it. And people were coming to say goodbye to me. That's a weird experience, right? And it's like, And people, you know, I wasn't really afraid. I was just really disappointed. I wasn't done yet. I wasn't ready to go, but there wasn't so much fear as there was simplicity in life. You just show up to the next doctor's appointment. So this guy brings me, and I'm in surgery, right? So the surgeon, I'd never met him. He comes out and he shakes shook his hand because I've had a lot of surgeries, and you want to make sure they see you as a real person. So you touch them, because you're just another part of their job, right? So I shook his hand and I said, I want you to know that I'm not afraid. I know you people really know what you're doing, and I want you to know that I'm not afraid. And he smiled at me. This guy, every year I call him, and he smiled at me, Dr. Nissen, and he said, well, good, because we're really good at this. And I said, thank you, And I introduced him. My wife was in the room with me. They let him come right into the surgery, and then they left. And my ex-wife was there. This is the point I wanted to make. My ex-wife, my second ex-wife was there because she's like a sister to me. We've made the amends. We're close. She's there with me. And my son and his girlfriend. So I introduced the surgeon to these people. I said, this is my wife, my ex-wife. And he said, oh, well, hi. And they walk away and he leans over and he goes, that's your wife and your ex-wife? And I said, yeah. And he goes, how do you do that? Said, we should talk. And that's the last thing I remember. They had a boom, I'm out. And I got the liver. It saved my life, and in that process, all the AA people are coming, and you're in the liver department at Cedars. They never asked who they were. They know, because this is where all the alcoholics go that need a liver, and my wife is there, my ex-wife, my kids, and the nurses would come in and just shove people out of the way. It was an incredible experience, especially the recovery process. And what I realized in that is I am surrounded by love. And the most important thing in my life is the relationships I have. All the ego trips and all that's the most important thing in my life, not an exaggeration, is the relationships I have today. I am not alone. When I got sober in 85, I was alone. And I'm not alone anymore. People ask me, how do you handle people wanting to put you up on a pedestal? And I go, it's a very loving thing. Isn't it nice? I've reached a point in my life where people look up to me and they have respect for me and they want to be close to me. Should I deny that? Is it all about me? No, it's all about us, man. It's like when you can see that, the ego really drains out of it. It's just a lovely place to be in my life where I'm surrounded by people that care about me and I care about them. The reason they care about me is I care about them. It's a two-way street. And there's a lot of humor about it and a lot of, in our home group, you see that, all the nicknames and stuff, all that stuff helping us don't lose your sense of humor here, Like Bill C sitting over there, the icon, and a home group, they don't know me that way. I have personal relationships with people in that room. They know the real me, if there is such a thing, We interact with each other. We're close to each other. That's a wonderful place to be. At one point when I was in the hospital and I'm recovering, I was so uncomfortable. It was after the surgery. One night I was up watching the news, which was really helpful. God damn. I shut it off now. But anyway, I'm so really uncomfortable. And I thought it's 3:00 in the morning, and I said, I need to meditate. So I got quiet and I breathed and I meditated. And at one point I burst out laughing because I realized what I was trying to do is change the situation. And that it doesn't work like that. What you do is you relax into it and stop struggling against it. So maybe you can't eliminate the pain and the discomfort, but you can eliminate the struggle. And that's what being peaceful is about. Stop struggling again. You don't have to like what's happening, but you can not struggle against it. Isn't that ultimate acceptance? And you learn that through life experience, not through intellectual understanding. And in AA, we have real life experience,
Look at you're doing such a wonderful job at describing what emotional sobriety is.
It occurs to me, Alan, you had a sobriety birthday. Was it the first last Friday?
Yeah, last Friday. Yeah, 54 years.
54?
54.
You must have got sober at 10.
That's what I think. That's the first thing I thought, honestly.
I needed to get sober at 10,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I waited 9 more years, so I was 19 when it happened for me.
That's really cool.